When the postman brought an unusual envelope, the hero first thought it was just another advertising mailing. But the heavy envelope with a seal and an ancient style of handwriting stood out among the usual correspondence. When he opened it, he found a letter informing him of an unexpected inheritance, an estate he had inherited from a distant relative he had never heard of. The letter was concise, but its tone was mysterious and disturbing. A note was added at the end. "This house has belonged to our family for centuries. But remember, it carries a heavy burden. Decide what to do with it carefully." Arriving in the small town where the estate was located, the hero immediately felt that this place had its own atmosphere. The locals looked at him with caution. They remained silent, but it was obvious that the family name evoked mixed feelings in them. The old house stood apart, on the edge of town, surrounded by thick trees that almost hid it from prying eyes. The estate looked majestic but neglected. Its tall towers and massive wooden doors with carvings reminded him of long-gone times. The hero felt a strange sensation gripping him with every step, as if the house was watching him. The key that had been enclosed with the letter fit the lock, and the door, though rusted, opened with an eerie creak. Inside, the house was even gloomier. The dusty furniture, heavy velvet curtains, and old portraits on the walls depicting his ancestors made it seem as if time had stopped. Everything here seemed frozen, but not deserted. There was a silence in the air that resembled waiting. The hero began to look around the rooms, opening them one by one. Many of them were sealed, and it seemed that they had not been opened for decades. The library attracted him the most. Large shelves were filled with books, many of which looked as if they were several centuries old. On one of the shelves, the hero found a thick diary with a leather cover. Opening it, he saw the entries made by his ancestors. These lines revealed the history of the estate and the family. The further he read, the more references appeared to some strange events, sudden deaths, disappearances, and unexplained phenomena that haunted the family from generation to generation. The diary hinted at some kind of curse imposed centuries ago. One of the ancestors, according to the records, made a deal with a mysterious group that performed rituals in the dungeons of the estate. In return, the family gained prosperity, but everything had a price. The hero read about how his relatives tried to find a way to break this connection, but everyone who made an attempt faced incomprehensible consequences. The feeling of anxiety grew. The diary mentioned that the closest descendant of the family was the last opportunity to break the curse, but it was unclear how to do it and what the price would be. The hero closed the book, feeling his hands trembling. His heritage was not a blessing, but a challenge that he had to face. The days at the estate began to seem endless. The hero tried to study the history of his family through the books and diaries he found, but more and more often he was haunted by strange phenomena. At night, the house came to life. Quiet footsteps echoed through the corridors. Doors he left closed suddenly opened, and mirrors seemed to show more than just a reflection. One night, while the hero was working in the library, he heard a faint whisper. The sound seemed to come straight from the walls. At first, he put it down to his tired imagination, but the whispering repeated over and over again, getting louder, as if the voices were trying to say something. The hero tried to find the source of the sound, but the more he investigated, the more he became convinced that the sound was covering the entire house. Another time, when he was sleeping, he was woken up by a cold sensation. The air was so cold that steam was coming out of his mouth. Feeling someone's presence, the hero looked around, but the room was empty. In the morning, he found thin scratches on the window that formed strange symbols. They resembled those he had seen in the books he had found, but their meaning remained unclear. One of the most disturbing events happened in the basement. The hero decided to check this space because he knew from his diaries that the basement was often the center of unexplained phenomena. In the corner, among the old boxes, he found a bricked door. The stones were roughly laid, as if they had been installed in a hurry. Something like a strange light, dim and flickering, was coming through the cracks between them. He felt a powerful impulse to go closer, but he was overcome with fear and decided to leave the place, at least for now. The neighbors also added fuel to the fire. During a visit to a local shop, the owner reluctantly hinted that the estate was notorious. He said that all the previous owners had disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. The hero tried to ask more, but the seller simply shook his head, advising him to stay away from the basement. The signs of the curse were becoming more and more pronounced. The hero began to see shadows moving on their own and feel someone's touch, even though he was alone in the house. In addition, he began to have recurring dreams. In these dreams, he saw himself in a huge underground hall surrounded by candles that burned with a bluish flame. In the center of the hall was an altar, and around it hooded figures were saying words in an incomprehensible language. When the hero woke up, he felt that these dreams were not just illusions, but fragments of events that had once happened. Gradually, the house began to change him. The hero felt his thoughts becoming heavy and his mood depressed. He began to lose his sense of time. Sometimes he could not remember what he had done the previous day. Everything around him hinted that the curse that weighed on his family was beginning to take effect, and he could not stand aside. The hero realized that he needed to find out more, even if it meant taking risks. To break the curse, he had to understand its nature, and to do so, he had to go deeper into the parts of the house he had been avoiding. But most importantly, he had to find what was hidden behind the brick door in the basement. After waking up from another nightmarish dream, the hero decided that he could no longer ignore the secrets that the mansion hides. His dreams and strange phenomena began to affect his psyche, forcing him to constantly think about the bricked door in the basement. He realized that the answers were hidden there. Going down to the basement with an old lantern in his hand, the hero felt the same cold that he had felt at night before. Walking carefully on the dusty floor, he reached the brick door. Its appearance was even more alarming. The stones looked as if they had been hastily fastened together, and there were scratches on the surface, as if someone or something had tried to get out. Using an old hammer found among the junk, the hero began to carefully remove the stones. The work was hard, but something made him continue. Finally, after a few hours, a small passage opened up in front of him, leading to a dark tunnel. From there, a dim bluish light slowly emanated. The tunnel was narrow and gloomy. Its walls seemed damp, and the air smelled of dampness and antiquity. The hero felt his every step echoing with a dull echo that disappeared into the unknown distance. He noticed carvings on the walls of the tunnel, strange symbols and figures that seemed to change depending on the angle of view. They resembled those on the scratched windows and in his dreams. At the end of the tunnel, the hero came out into a large hall lit by bluish candlelight. The hall was huge, with a high ceiling, from which stalactites covered with crystalline deposits hung. In the center of the room stood an altar made of dark stone, on which lay ancient objects, a dagger with a rusty blade, a book with a tattered cover, and a bowl with something that resembled dried blood. Around the altar were hooded figures carved out of stone, their faces twisted in horrified expressions. The hero approached the altar, feeling fear and curiosity struggling within him. He took the book, opened it, and saw a text written in an ancient language he did not understand. But with each page, he began to feel as if the meaning of the words were seeping into his mind. The book was about an agreement made many centuries ago. One of his ancestors had turned to a mysterious cult to gain prosperity for his family. The agreement stipulated that the house would become a place of power for the cult, and each successive generation of the family would pay the price for this agreement. The text described how the cult members would perform rituals in this room, making sacrifices to keep the agreement strong. But a few generations ago, one of the ancestors decided to break with the cult. He destroyed part of the ritual altar and walled up a tunnel in an attempt to stop the cult's influence on the family. However, the curse had already been imposed, and its effect continued to destroy the lives of everyone who lived in the estate. The hero realized that the manor was not just a place to live. It is a center of a dark force that constantly feeds on the lives of those who live here. The book hinted at the possibility of breaking the agreement, but this required restoring what had been destroyed and completing an unfinished ritual. The hero knew it would be dangerous, but there was no other way. Closing the book, he returned it to the altar and looked at the hooded figures. For a moment, he thought they were moving, but blinking his eyes, he saw that it was just a play of shadows. Gathering all his strength, the hero returned to the tunnel, knowing that he had learned the truth, but now he had to make a choice that would change everything. Returning from the underground hall to the main part of the mansion, the hero felt that the house had changed. The darkness, which had previously seemed just an absence of light, now became almost alive. Every corner, every shadow made him feel like he was being watched. Even the air seemed thicker, filled with an invisible weight. The diaries, books, and everything he had learned in the dungeon made it clear. To stop the curse, he had to complete the ritual he had begun many years ago. But this required not only restoring the damaged altar, but also activating a force that could both destroy the deal and absorb him. The hero decided to prepare for this test. He returned to the library, looking for additional records that could help him understand the mechanics of the ritual. On one of the tables, he found an old map of the estate. It marked places that could be key to completing his mission. One of them was a crypt located in the backyard, which, according to his ancestors, was the burial place of the first family members involved in the transaction. After gathering all the necessary items, a book, a lantern, and a small knife found in the altar room, the hero set out for the crypt. The night was quiet, but this silence did not calm him down, but rather tensed him to the limit. In the moonlight, the crypt looked almost ominous. The heavy stone doors covered with moss seemed untouched for centuries. But as soon as the hero touched them, they opened with a crunch, as if they were waiting for him. It was cold and damp inside. Along the walls were niches with old coffins. On the central pedestal was another coffin covered with a cloth that seemed unusually new compared to the others. The hero walked closer, and when his hand touched the lid, the room was filled with quiet but distinct whispers. These were the same voices he had heard earlier in the house. They did not demand, but urged him to continue. When he opened the coffin, he found another artifact, an amulet carved from black stone with the same symbol as the one on the dungeon walls. As soon as he picked it up, it seemed as if time stood still. The air became still, and the hero felt something awakening deep inside the house. Returning to the basement, he began to restore the altar. The stones that had been previously destroyed were now returning to their place, as if obeying an invisible force. The amulet took center stage, and the blue flames he had seen earlier now flared up again, brighter and stronger. The book he had brought with him opened by itself, and its pages began to turn, stopping at an unfamiliar symbol that glowed red. But it was at that moment that the house began to shake. Cracks ran along the walls, and shapes began to form out of the darkness that seemed to be only the absence of light. They were faceless, but moving at an incredible speed, as if they were trying to stop him. The hero realized that these were the remnants of a cult that guarded the agreement so that no one could break it. Feeling the fear swallowing him up, the hero continued to read the text from the book, not understanding the words, but feeling their power. The red light became almost blinding, and at the last moment, when the shadows almost reached him, the altar exploded with a bright flash. The darkness disappeared. The house stopped shaking. The altar remained intact, but no longer emitted any light. The hero sat on the floor, barely breathing, feeling the tension slowly disappear. He realized that he had done it. The ritual was complete, and the connection to the curse was broken. But at the same time, he felt that the house would never be the same again. And now he faced a new task, to decide what to do with this place and his heritage. The morning sun was shedding its warm rays on the mansion, but the hero looked at it with a different feeling. After everything that had happened, he knew that this house could no longer be a place to live. Not for him and not for anyone else. The curse was broken, but the price was higher than he could have imagined. The house seemed empty, although its walls still retained the echoes of the events that had happened that night. The hero felt that the mansion no longer radiated hostile energy, but something strange remained in it, as if the house itself was mourning the loss of a part of its essence. The altar in the basement was destroyed, and the book that used to have such power had now turned into a pile of ashes. The hero gathered his belongings, taking only what could be important for understanding the family's history: diaries, maps, and a few artifacts. He decided to leave everything else behind. His last decision was to transfer the estate to the local authorities as a historical site. He signed a contract under which the house was to become a museum to preserve it for future generations, but without any ties to the family. In this way, he hoped to finally get rid of the connection between his family and this place. In the days before his departure, the hero noticed that the locals began to look at him differently. There was no trace of the wary glances, but instead there was curiosity and even some respect. Although no one asked him about what had happened, everyone felt that the house no longer posed the threat that had frightened everyone before. Before leaving the city, the hero returned to the mansion for the last time. He walked through the empty rooms, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. On the veranda overlooking the backyard, he stopped to take a last look at the crypt, now completely closed. This place became a symbol of the completed cycle. Getting into the car, the hero felt a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. However, it was accompanied by a tinge of anxiety. He knew that the curse was gone, but the memories of what had happened would remain with him forever. The house was no longer a trap, but it remained a reminder of how far human ambition can go. On his way out of the city, the hero could not shake the feeling that he was still being watched. The shadows of the trees that flashed past the windows seemed too thick, and the whisper of the wind resembled the voices he heard in the house. But he knew that although the shadows of the past would always be there, his choice had ended the chain of suffering, and now the family was free. The mansion remained standing, its old walls no longer hiding a dark force. It became just a place of memory, where history met legend. But for the hero, this chapter was over. He had made his choice, and now he could move forward, leaving the curse behind.